Okay. All right. It's probably really important for me, in the interest of full disclosure, for just with all you guys. I contacted David last night because I was concerned about how my bio read in the pamphlet, the itinerary for tonight, and after hearing Nick, David, Nick, Tony, and Bill, I started to, it really connected me with culture. Economics is something we don't have control. I mean, it's something that is beyond us because there are corporations, there are, a lot of resources invested in ensuring that decisions that should be made for the common good are taken out of our hands, yeah? And so to counter that, you need to be incredibly confident and know about who you are. And for me to stand up here tonight, I said to David, my background is, in the bio it said, the truth is, my father was an abusive alcoholic. He's no longer with us. My mother has a mental illness, which made it difficult for her to support and defend. So I felt like I didn't have an ally. So from a young age, from my early teens, I spent a lot of time out of the house. I found it really... They were from an Italian background. They came here as immigrants. I found that incredibly onerous, the task of being the first of five. I found that was unfair. And I know this is all about me right now, but I really struggled with that responsibility of speaking to people that came knocking on our door and trying to translate English and making sure that they weren't screwed by someone trying to sell encyclopedias or some, cold canvasser, and taking my brothers and sisters. I found that really hard. So I started spending a lot of time on the street, and so by the time I was 17, 18, I was out. I wanted out of the suburbs. I wanted out of there, and I landed in Melbourne. And I was lucky enough to find a few couches to sleep on. I was lucky to find people who shared a worldview that I did. I was politicised, so I was squatting. I did some couch surfing. I did some rough sleeping. I have a problem with, because I don't think rough sleeping implies that it's some choice that I want to sleep rough. It's street homelessness. It's people being forced to sleep on the street because they either can't afford or don't feel safe with the alternative. And one of the things that is characteristic of homelessness in the 21st century is that people will, and I've spoken to me, because right now I work at a homeless health service. I've been there for a year, and I've lived with homeless people. And I don't have statistics, I'm sorry, but anecdotally I can tell you people will say no. They don't want to, no one wants to pay $250 a week to have the privilege to be abused, to be, have their door kicked in at all hours of the night by people who feel as disempowered, devalued, unheard, alienated, delegitimised, any pejorative, the way, if Rita Panahi thinks that she can make you feel like shit, there's nothing worse than being homeless for 10, 15 years and the feelings that because of the expectations of the outside world. So the Susie O'Briens of the world, even though she thinks she's got a monopoly on making people feel like shit, trust me, she doesn't. Because the outside world, is able to project the feeling of feeling helpless and feeling confused and lonely. And as Bill points out, you know, we having no connection to your culture, feeling like you're outside of the culture, feeling like you've been dispossessed and losing your place within the community, because that's what homelessness is. It's not just being without a roof. You've lost your place. And a lot of the times it's character, it's not character, it's you can you know, people aren't in the census, and it's not just because you're an anarchist and you don't want to be counted. You're just, because you're not housed, you're not counted. You don't vote. So in civil society, you don't exist, and that's why I think it's easy for people to make decisions about. I think it's really easy for, you know, even homeless people are everywhere and nowhere at the same time. That's how I felt. I felt like, you know, I felt like I was invisible, and I think that's one of the huge things about homelessness is that, yeah, the most visible forms of homelessness get the most attention, and that's what drives the policy. You know, the City of Melbourne, the protocols, the trying to criminalise, and the sort of this attempt, this infantile attempt to change the wording of bylaws that have been around since the fucking Depression. They wanted to shoo people away from, you know, the public amenity laws come from the Depression. That's what these protocols stem, you know, the camping laws. They wanted to make the wording of the camping laws more vague, so then they could charge you with camping in the city. No one's on a bloody holiday. I know it's not funny, but language is important. And that's what was behind all this, is that what we're going to do is we're going to penalise you guys. It's not already hard enough for everyone that you might be struggling with issues of identity, with health, with economics, which is, as Tony points out, is one of the big drivers, is the bigger driver than anything else, is economics. And the newspapers don't want to talk about inequality. They would rather take a snapshot of someone who's dishevelled, who's just lifted their head out of bed from their sleeping bag, and then attribute intentions and motivations to why this person is in the city square or is on Elizabeth Street, without this person having an ability to respond. If that person had a public profile, they could sue for defamation. But because you don't have a public persona, you don't fucking exist. As far as the law's concerned, it's open slather. So, okay, and so trying to come to terms with, and I'm going to come back to culture, because I was, like I said, I felt a little bit ashamed of where I came from and who I am. But Bill reminded me that I shouldn't be. That there, you know, the dispossession that happens to people that don't have resources, it's not our fucking fault. It's not our fault. These are forces beyond our control, individually beyond our control, and that's what the system does incredibly bloody well, is it individualises people's situation. Media does it really well. It takes a photo of this homeless person, and yes, they're resilient, they're strong. They might, you know, they put all these beautiful adjectives. You think, oh, how incredible. Occasionally, they put the positive adjectives: strong, resilient, courageous, and all this sort of stuff. But they won't talk about how fucked over they've been by the economy. And so it makes it. I hope I don't get lost here. I think it individualises the homeless experience. We don't talk about the systemic pushes of homelessness. The traditional family unit. Nick, you were talking about the Catholic Church and how that is probably one of the unsafest places to be for a child. The nuclear family, you know, I have the unfortunate privilege of witnessing what happens in the nuclear family. it, you know, it's a dictatorship. It's a patriarchal dictatorship. And sometimes I've been to seminars where people talking about, that they talk about how we respond to young people who get into conflict with their mothers, who may have, for whatever reason. And a lot of people talk about, well, we need to bring them back together and reconcile and this sort of stuff, when the root of the problem, as far as, you know, from what I can see, happens within those four walls. Happens within the nuclear family unit and those expectations and the traditional expectations of the traditional family unit. And I wonder, maybe this person is better off living with other young people. Maybe we need to have alternatives to the nuclear family. Maybe we need to have choices. Maybe that's something that's been taken away from us. And David was asking, what are some of the things that we could do? Policy things. And I'm not a politician, but what came out of the occupation of those properties on Bendigo Street? Now, a bit of background. A whole bunch of properties were bought by the state government to build a freeway, yeah? The east-west, yes? And they were scattered around Clifton Hill, Collingwood, Moonee Ponds, Kensington. I believe there's like 150 maybe, individual, something like that, properties. A couple of friends of ours were squatting one that had been empty for at least 6 months on Bendigo Street, and this was during and mind you, this was during the Royal Commission into sexual abuse, family, all this stuff was happening. So while these 3 young women were taking shelter in a publicly owned property, we're not saying that I should be able to walk into your house and make myself at home in your lounge room. This is publicly owned. Belongs to all of us. All of us. Well, that's right, and vacant. Thank you. They took shelter in there. The city council threw them out. The guy who was mowing the lawns, and I don't want to put it on him because all he's doing is mowing the lawns apparently. He got in touch with the coppers or the council, and they sent some people down, and they got thrown out without any information, support. They said that they did provide that support in the age, but that's untrue. We know these people personally, and that didn't happen. And they were thrown out onto the street while Rosie Batty was talking about family violence, while the Royal Commission was happening. And so the state's, the state's concern for the well-being of our sisters, our brothers and sisters, in that case was pretty fucking shallow. And so when we found out about this and we went down and we had a look and we found that there was more than one empty house, we went down there and we were there we occupied one house and we were maybe there for half a day, not even, maybe 3 hours. By the time we were making pancakes on Bendigo Street for the neighbours. And so we had this sort of, basically a street party, and we invited the neighbours to come to tell them that they were living on a street that was where people, and this was during the street count. This is the street count had just happened in the city of Melbourne, where there was 247 people they counted sleeping in the CBD. Sleeping in the CBD. They could have fixed that problem, in a fucking heartbeat. They chose not to, and private real estate agents were taking now, I don't want to hang it on middle class people necessarily right now, but these people were already housed. So while the street count was happening, the publicly owned houses that were vacant people were being escorted by a private real estate agent through these houses, while there were 247 people sleeping on the street. And so that's where the frustration. So we ended up occupying 8 of them for 8 months, and we negotiated some housing for people. I'll finish on this, I promise. I think we need to take back what is ours. The city belongs to us. It doesn't belong, and it's simplistic. And I am simplifying this, but our culture, the economy, housing can be whatever we want it to be. It is ours, and we need to take it back. Thanks.